Welcome to the 15th video in our series of quilts and projects using 5-inch squares or charm packs. For this runner, you will need 1 charm pack, 1/3 of a yard for binding, and 3/4 of a yard for backing. Start by picking out 6 charms that are similar in color and cut those into rectangles that measure 2.5 inches by 5 inches. For my woodland winter version, I picked all lights for these rectangles, but I also could have picked red or black or green. While you're at the cutting table, you can also cut 4 strips that are 2.5 inches by the width of fabric for the binding. I picked a red fabric for the binding to complement this charm pack. For my runner using the night owl fabric, I'm going to pick 6 dark squares instead of light. This would also be an easy runner to make as a single color runner. Just cut 42 5-inch squares of your favorite fabrics and start from there. Just make sure that when you're picking fabric for it, you get a variety of tones, textures, and patterns. For this runner, I decided to put the darks as the rectangles because those pieces will be along the edge of the runner and they will blend right into the binding fabric, which is also black. The finished size of this project will be 16 inches by 48.5 inches. While I'm still at the cutting table, I'm going to cut the 3/4 yard piece of backing fabric on the fold so that I'll have 2 pieces. I'm going to piece it side to side so that I get a long enough piece for the runner. And because this is a directional print, I'm going to be a little careful where I'm piecing it so I can kind of get it to match up. I'm not going to worry about getting it perfectly matched up. I just want to get it close. Because I offset the fabric just a little bit, I did measure to make sure I was still going to have the width I'd need for the runner when it was finished. For the winter woodland version, I picked a busy all-over print for the backing. Once pressed and the project quilted, you'll hardly see the seam on the back. Now it's time to sew. Please use 1/4 inch seam allowances. We're going to start by sewing 12 sets of 2 charms. I set aside 12 of the 5-inch charms so I wouldn't accidentally make too many sets of 2. As you're sewing the 2 charms together, mix up the colors and the patterns as you go so you're not sewing like fabrics to each other. Don't overthink the directional fabrics too much. They will get cut one more time, and in a runner they will face all the different directions. Once you've made your 12 sets of 2 charms, you're going to cut them apart and then add another charm onto each of these sets. Make sure to keep mixing up the patterns and the colors as you sew on the 3rd charm. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you enjoy projects using 5-inch squares or charm packs. After you've sewn your 12 sets of 3 charms, you're going to add a rectangle to one end of each of these sets. I had enough variety in my sets that I never ended up having to sew a black rectangle to a black square, but even if you did, that would be okay. There was enough variety in the rectangles. I was also able to mix up the fabric so that I didn't have like designs sewn together. Now that the rectangles have been added, it's time to cut them apart and then head to the ironing board to press. For these seams, it doesn't matter which way you press the seams. You can press towards the rectangle or away from the rectangle, or you can press all the seams open. The beauty of this runner is there are no seams to match, so it's easy to put together. Once pressed, these units will measure 5 inches by 16 inches. Head to the cutting table once you're done pressing. We're going to cut these pieces lengthwise to get 2 rectangles that are 2.5 inches by 16 inches. You can cut these one at a time, or you can stack and cut multiples at once. I started by cutting 4 at once, but I would highly recommend doing 3 at a time if you want to cut multiples, or 2 at a time. You will end up with 24 sections that are 2.5 inches by 16 inches. If desired, you could make this a narrower runner by using only 2 charms and a rectangle before cutting them down the middle. This would make the width of the runner about 11.5 inches by 48.5 inches. You would also have 12 leftover charms to use in another project. Once you have all 24 sections cut, it's time to start sewing the pieces together. Sew 2 sections together. Alternate the end where the squares are. There should be no seams to match in this whole runner as you're sewing pieces together. Sew all of the sets of 2 the same way. I always sewed mine with the square on top being fed into the machine first. I highly suggest pressing after sewing the sets of 2. You can press the seams to one side or you can press the seams open. I love using my Oliso iron to press. It gets really hot. I love that when I set it aside, it lifts up and doesn't scorch my ironing board. And when I touch it, the legs go up into the iron and it makes it easy to work with. It's also much nicer to my wrist because I don't have to twist my wrist to set it on its bottom. Take the 12 press sets of 2 and make 6 sets of 4. Then you'll have 3 sets of 8 and then sew the 3 sets together. You can press after each of the sets that you sew together, or you can just keep sewing and press all of it at the end. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying the video and leave a comment for us. We read all of them. The best way to support our channel is to share our content with your quilting friends and to subscribe. It's free, and we really appreciate it. Once you've sewn all the sections together, it's time to press. You can press all the seams in one direction, or you can press the seams open. I usually use a little Mary Ellen's Best Press spray to make sure everything lays nice and flat. You can use a 1/4 inch seam or a 1/2 inch seam to sew the backing. I will usually press a seam on the back of a quilt open so that it creates less bulk when quilting. Layer the front together with the batting and backing. I like to baste the layers with 505 spray to keep it all together. Before I switch over to my walking foot, I'm going to put together my winter woodland version. I'm going to use all the same steps as I did with the night owl version, except I'm using the light rectangles instead of dark rectangles. I don't know about you, but whenever I make the second version of something, it always goes much faster than the first version. We'd love to get your opinion. Let us know in the comment section below which colorway you prefer, the Woodland Winter Christmas version or the Night Owl version. Or you can list a charm pack you would consider using to make this runner. If you would prefer a runner that isn't quite as wide, you could make this a narrower runner by using only 2 charms and a 1/2 charm before cutting them down the middle. This would make the width about 11.5 inches by 48.5 inches long, and you would have 12 leftover charms to use in another project. So here's a quick update on the number of charm packs I have. At the end of the last video, I had 54. I used 2 in this video, and then I added 5 more to my collection, so I'm at 57 currently. One suggestion I have for making your runners nice and straight is once they're basted together, Look at it from all four sides to make sure it's straight. It's easy to smooth it out and put a curve in it, so look at it from all sides to prevent it from curving. To quilt these runners, I suggest very simple quilting, although you can quilt any way you desire. For the Night Owl version, I just quilted in the ditch in one direction, and then I did some lines across the length of the runner following the seam lines. For the quilting threads on the Night Owl version, I used a beige color on top. I thought it blended in nicely with all the fabrics and disappeared into the background. In the bobbin to match the backing, I used a darker brown thread. For the Winter Woodland Christmas version, I first stitched in the ditch along all the rows, and then I made X's in each of the rectangles and the squares. I just eyeballed my lines, but you could also mark it with a ruler and marking pen. That way you have something to follow that's nice and straight. For that runner, I used a green thread in both the top and in the bobbin. For quilting, especially straight lines, I use a walking foot for the best results. It will feed all 3 layers together at the same rate to keep everything nice and smooth. If you want to do more quilting on your home machine, a walking foot is the best investment you can make. I have started using the diagonal seam tape to help me sew my binding pieces together, and they have never been straighter, and I'm loving this method. You make an X with the fabrics, and then just from one corner to the other, you follow that middle line, and it makes a nice straight line for you to have for the seam allowance. Cut the seam down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then press the seam open. This method creates a nice flat binding with no lumps. Once you're done quilting, trim all of the raw edges to match and attach the binding. For these runners, I put the binding on the front of the runner, pressed it around to the back, and then used clips to hold it into place. I then top stitched it in the ditch very close to the binding to catch the binding on the back side. Use thread to match the binding and you'll hardly even see it. If you needed a simple baby quilt, you could make 3 of these, sew them together to have a quilt top that's 48 by 48. Here is the Winter Woodland version, all finished and ready to put on a table. And here is the Night Owl version. I love how they both turned out, and I can't wait to make this one again. It was really simple and really fun. If you haven't already, make sure to give us a thumbs up if you like the video, share with your quilting friends, leave a comment for us, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and happy quilting!